recording this, please? I think it looks like it's recording now. So
Yes.
as chair of the Timberlane Regional School Board, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I'm confirming that we are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the board have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through this platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen. We previously gave notice to the public of the necessary information for accessing the meeting, including how to access the meeting using Zoom or telephonically. Instructions have been provided on the website of the Timberlane Regional School Board at timberlane.net/Zoom TRSB. If anybody has a problem, please call 382-6541, extension 3955. Note all votes will be taken by roll call vote. We'll start the meeting by roll call attendance. State your presence, whether or not there's anyone else in the room, which is required under the right to know law. Kat?
Brian Boyle.
I'm here. I'm alone in the room. There will be other people in the household.
Lee Doobie, not here. Dr. Farah.
I'm here. There are other members of my household in the house, but not in this room.
Barbara Kishka.
Present, alone in the residence.
Sheila Lowe's.
Here, alone in the residence.
Sarah McEmar.
I'm here. I am alone in my room, but there are other members of my family in the house.
Sean O'Neill, not present. Kristen Savage.
I am here. I am currently alone in this room, but there are other members of my family in the house.
And Jennifer Silva.
In a car somewhere.
In the car somewhere.
Just don't hear her.
Note that she was here but did not have audio, please. Ouch. So, I'm sorry, I need to find the 91A. So we're going to move right into a non-public session here. Then once this is over, we will leave this meeting and then move into a public meeting at 7. That's on a different link. So I'm looking for a motion to enter a non-public into section 191A, colon 3, section 2, C, and L.
So moved.
Brian
Second.
makes the motion, Sheila seconds. Kat, could you take the vote, please?
Mr. Boyle,
Yes.
Dr. Farah,
Yes.
Mrs. Kishka,
Yes.
Ms. Lowe's,
Yes.
Mrs. McEmar,
Yes.
Mrs. Savage,
Yes.
Mrs. Silva.
We lost her.
Lost her. Okay, so we will move into a non-public now. Dean, I think you can,
You already read the emergency broadcast message.
that is correct. So the board men opened the meeting at 6 o'clock in a non-public session. So we are resuming this meeting. I will call it to order again. Kat, if you could take the roll call vote again, just to ensure that everybody has made it back into the public session, I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Boyle,
I am here and I am now alone in the house.
Lee Doobie,
I am here. I am alone in my home office.
Kim Farah,
I'm here. There are other members of the household in the house, but I'm alone in this room.
Barbara Kishka,
Present, alone in the residence.
Sheila Lowe's,
Here, alone in the house.
Sarah McEmar,
I'm here. I'm alone in my room, but there are other members of my family in the house.
Sean O'Neill,
Did it make it?
There he is. Sean, you're up for a roll call.
Here, I just joined.
Welcome back.
Are you alone or do you have family in the residence?
I have people in the residence.
Poor
I'm alone
Sean.
in my office.
Kristen Savage.
I am present. I am currently alone, but there are other members of my household within the house.
And Jennifer Silva.
I am present. I don't even know how to answer the rest of this. I am on the road. I will probably be in and out, doing the best I can here, so bear with me, people.
Dr. Cochran.
I am alone in the room, but there is another family member in the residence.
And Jenna Horan.
Oh,
She is not here today. She had another commitment. She did notify me in advance that she would not be available. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So if we could move on and rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
pledge
allegiance
allegiance
to
To
the
the
to the
flag
flag
of the United
of the
States
United States of America
and to the
and to the
republic
republic
for which it
for which it
stands,
stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty and
liberty
justice.
and justice for all.
Okay, moving on, we have two sets of minutes here that we need to approve. So I'll be looking for a motion to approve the 8/6/20 minutes. And then
So
flip
moved.
to the
So-
non-public. Sheila makes the
Second.
motion, Barbara seconds. Is there any discussion on the minutes?
I
No?
think there was just one thing I saw, believe it or not. Hang on. Sorry,
No
it
problem.
was just a spelling error, actually. Wasn't anything major. Sorry, that's my computer.
I would characterize a spelling mistake as a clerical error, and that just gets fixed.
Yeah,
Yep.
I can do that.
Send it in.
It's not a big deal.
So Kat, could you take the roll call vote on that, please?
Mr. Boyle.
Yes.
Mr. Doobie.
I'll abstain. I have not reviewed them.
Dr. Farah.
Yes.
Mrs. Kishka.
Yes,
Ms. Lowe's.
Yes,
Mrs. Mockmer.
Abstain.
Mr. O'Neill.
Yes.
Mrs. Savage.
Yes.
Mrs. Silva.
Yes,
Thank you. Now moving on to the non-public draft minutes. Those are in your agenda packet.
so moved. Move that we accept them,
Barbara moves to accept.
the
second,
non-public.
Sheila seconds. Looking for a motion. Sorry, roll call vote, please, Kat.
Mr. Boyle.
Yes.
Mr. Doobie.
Abstain.
Dr. Farah.
Yes.
Mrs. Kishka.
Yes,
Ms. Lowe's.
yes,
Mrs. Mockmer.
Abstain.
Mr. O'Neill.
Yes.
Mrs. Savage.
Yes.
Silva.
yeah,
Okay, thank you. There's no student representative this evening, so we'll defer on that. There's no delegate or individual wishing to speak that submitted their form in advance. We will move on to the action on the school reopening plan here in just 1 minute. We are hoping to have the board back in live session for the 20th. Just putting the administration on notice. I think we should plan to use the PAC or the PAC recital room. I'm assuming they will be complete the work on there. I think that will be the least amount of effort. I don't feel we could use the boardroom because of the number of people that we would have. So if we could plan on that, I would appreciate it. And there is also a non-public session for the board on the 18th, and that will be in the PAC recital hall that is not open to the public. So I want to move on to the action on the school reopening plan. First, I want to thank the staff. They were online for 2 hours Tuesday night answering questions. They're still working on those questions. For those that didn't tune in before, there's a Q&A page now on the district websites. And I appreciate all the effort, and the board appreciates the effort that the staff, especially the administrative staff, have been putting into trying to answer the questions. And feel free to keep asking questions and we will keep moving forward. So I'm going to open the floor. There are some updates on the plan from the last time. The board will be looking to take action on the plan this evening. That does not mean that we will not keep relooking at the plan and reviewing it on a weekly or every time we meet basis. And if we need to call an emergency meeting for some reason to reevaluate, we will certainly do that. So this is by no means the last time that this board will be looking at the plan. So Mrs. Allaire, if you want to present, then the board will move to questions before we move to action.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Farah. Good evening, everyone. We wanted to come, I'm here with Mr. Mark Pedersen, Director of Secondary Curriculum, and Mrs. Lucy Kanotis, who's our Director of Elementary Curriculum. We wanted to first this evening just present some clarifying information with regard to 4 general categories that reflect common questions that we have seen coming in, either through the form that was provided to community members to submit questions for Tuesday evening's Q&A session, or just individually through email correspondence, voicemails that we have received ourselves from members of the community, or from students as well. So the first topic that we wanted to just update you all and the public on pertains to the topic of metrics. So Tuesday evening, we did present a general overview of a document that a subgroup of our in-person task force that created. So that group was comprised of health officials on our task force, as well as Dr. Cochran, Dr. Farah. We had local health officials as well as our school nurses on that group. And they developed a generic document with some criteria that was included on there for when we may shift into different phases of our plan. Relative to that, in our overall reopening plan, we shared that at the state level, the Department of Health and Human Services is actively working on metrics at the state level that we will have as guidance ourselves. So those are in process. But late this afternoon, many of you may have seen, many people who are watching this may have seen on the news, Governor Sununu announced an update on school reopening and how that connects to tracing of cases and how the state is going to support schools and districts in making decisions, in tracing cases, and informing the community. So I wanted to go through some general updates that we learned ourselves this afternoon. More information, I suspect, will be forthcoming as this was late-breaking information today. But for those of you who may not have seen this, Governor Sununu did announce that state health officials will plan to work with schools when a case is identified in the building. Health officials plan to notify schools of positive cases. Schools will then be required to notify the community of positive cases. Health workers will identify any close contacts of the person, who will also be told to isolate. So that contact tracing this afternoon through the press conference, we were told that the state is prepared to increase their contact tracing in support of school districts as we proceed with the potential to reopen our buildings. Also, according to the governor's message this afternoon, whether COVID-19 cases force a school to close buildings depends on a variety of factors. So in the governor's message, he spoke to clusters of cases. Clusters will be defined as 3 or more cases in a classroom or in a cohort of students. So I think you are all well aware that our plan does include an option, a hybrid model, where we will have cohorts of students. So the state will be tracing cases in clusters of 3 or more. In such cases, they suggest that schools might contain those clusters by isolating the people who were infected as well as their close contacts. School officials will also notify the community when a cluster has been detected. Different schools might deal with clusters in different ways. Large schools that experience 2 or 3 isolated clusters might be able to continue to operate if there is no evidence of broader transmission. But that will be on a case-by-case basis, and we will work as a district, I suspect, in conjunction with the state health officials. The governor also spoke to the different term of an outbreak. So an outbreak would be when there is evidence of COVID-19 transmission between classrooms or cohorts, so beyond the clusters. When state health officials determine that there has been an outbreak, the health department will notify the community and the school will transition to remote learning for at least 14 days. So that is, as we talk about metrics, that is an additional metrics that we just became aware of late this afternoon. Beyond that, as I mentioned, the Department of Health and Human Services has said that they will release a centralized website that is not yet posted, but will be forthcoming, that will list all schools across the state with updated information relative to the number of cases in schools as we move forward with the first day of school across the state in different districts. The state has also planned to increase their contact tracing to support districts to determine members of the community who may need to be contacted to determine the level of isolation or quarantine that they need to transition to, depending on the status of either the clusters or the outbreak. So as we move forward with discussions around metrics, I think it's important for us to remind ourselves that these metrics are in flux. They are in constant development at the state level. And we just received this information late this afternoon through a press release or in press conference. So that being said, we wanted to make sure we updated you all on that in case you hadn't seen that. Another area of common questions pertain to teacher certification. So I'm actually going to pass this off to Mr. Pedersen, who's going to give you some clarifying information relative to that topic. So I know Mark is on this call.
Thank you, Ms. Lair. So questions have arisen in regard to those teachers who may be teaching remotely to those students who are learning remotely. As we've said, we're going to try to pair those students who are, medically compromised and cannot go to school with teachers who are also medically compromised and might not be able to be in the building. So we're going to make every effort to, pair those people together and ensure that kids can still have an education. But as we have said at the high school level, we might not be able to guarantee a full program of studies just with the teachers that we have. And most likely students' current schedules are going to be changing if they are electing that pure remote option. But with that being said, please note that we are abiding by New Hampshire DOE rules or Department of Education rules to ensure that those teachers will be teaching within their certification area. So according to the New Hampshire Department of Education, administrative rules require that all staff be licensed if a license is required by the New Hampshire Board of Ed. And specific, I won't get into the exact legalese, but local school boards shall require that each professional staff member is certified for assignment by their department. So we are ensuring that a teacher is going to be teaching in their certification area. I think there were some concerns about, a high school teacher teaching elementary kids or vice versa, or, a high school English teacher teaching, having to teach PE, or, a high school math teacher having to teach social studies. So, we just wanted to ensure the public that we are following New Hampshire rules and regulations, and with one little piece here is that an educator with sufficient content knowledge, as determined by the school principal, may be given a minor assignment to teach in a program area that he or she is not certified in. And that minor assignment is defined as less than 50% of the individual's weekly work time. So some examples of this might be, if a teacher is licensed in chemistry, they might teach a section of physics, or a teacher who's licensed in PE or physical education might be assigned a section of health. So again, just to assure the public that we are looking at teacher certification with the teachers who are teaching remotely and with those students who are learning remotely, to ensure that these teachers are certified to teach the assignments that we're giving them. And with that, I believe I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Kanotis.
Thank you, Mr. Pedersen. So the next area that we wanted to address, we had several questions about schedule. The students in the cohort model, as people well know now, will be in school 2 days and remotely working for 3 days. And school hours of 7:20 to 2:15 and 8:30 to 3:10 at the elementary, 7:20 to 2:15 at the secondary. Those are the times that we will be in school, both in the in-person days and remotely, in order to ensure continuity. During the remote days, students at the secondary level already have their schedule, and they follow the normal school day schedule. But several questions have come in regards to the elementary schedule. Typically, our elementary teachers have a set unified art time, a set personalization block in ELA and in math, and then lunch and recess. But they're able to schedule their academic delivery flexibly over the course of the day. But we recognize the need for parents to have a more concrete, consistent schedule. So late this afternoon, we linked on our FAQ section, as Dr. Farah mentioned, an example, a draft elementary schedule. What that looks like is teacher A, B, C, D. In all of our grade levels, we have at most 4 teachers who are teaching that same grade. So you'll see that there are 4 possible schedules out there. Again, once we have class lists, we hope to be able to develop schedules with our teachers and give some flexibility before starting school to the teacher to set her schedule or his schedule. And that will also be based on the data that we're receiving currently around staff and students returning to a cohort model, or staff and students who are on a remote model. But as a general frame, you'll see in those schedules, we have an 8:15 to 8:30, first thing in the morning, open office time that could be scheduled by the teacher or by the family as a connection, family, parent, student to teacher. We then will be going into a morning meeting, as we've talked about before. This is the place where elementary teachers really work on social emotional learning, connecting the class together with their peers and also with the teacher. That's approximately 15 to 20 minutes. We also have our school psychologists and school counselors who have culled some resources for teachers and activities and things to do to support transitioning back into school. And that would be the time that those activities take place. That allows for a break for both the teacher and the student to step away from the computer for a little while before they come back to a short lesson. That 9 to 11:15 time consists, depending on which teacher you are, consists of multiple things. Whole group lessons followed by a time for large group support, small group support, individual scheduled conferences. Some teachers have a unified art lesson scheduled during that time. We have built in movement breaks that could be on or offline, as well as snacks. And potentially a writing lesson could be seen during that time as well. We're looking at a 5 to 15 minute lesson with about a half-hour practice, whether that be on or offline, and then a reconnection. We've aligned our lunchtime to the secondary, so students will have lunch between 11:15 and 11:45, along with a time for a break. And directly after lunch, we've built in another open office time. That time could be scheduled time with individual students, with checking in with families. It could be a time where students are receiving special education services, or for some students, it might be an additional time for independent practice. And then in the afternoon, that 12:15 to 2:30 block looks very similar to the morning block, where depending on which teacher you are, it could include some of those different lessons. At the end of the day, we have an open office time, again, where our teachers are available to connect with individual students for services based on their needs. So I'm going to hand this back to Mrs. Allaire to speak a little bit about synchronous and asynchronous learning.
Thank you. So there have been several questions that have come up with regard to the implementation of synchronous or asynchronous learning as they pertain to both remote learning and the hybrid cohort model, which contains elements of remote learning. So we want to be clear that remote instruction is not equivalent to 100% online synchronous learning. However, we plan to include elements of both synchronous and asynchronous learning in our remote model. So to clarify that a little bit, when we are in school in normal times, all of our instruction, whether in person or remote, is a combination of both synchronous and asynchronous learning. So synchronous learning refers to all types of learning that happen when the learner and the instructor are in the same place together at the same time for learning to take place. So synchronous learning occurs when students are in person, in school, as well as in live online lessons or meetings through video conferencing, through whole class meetings or smaller group discussions. Asynchronous learning is learning that can occur in different times and spaces, particular to each learner through personalization or differentiation, as opposed to synchronous learning, which is at the same time and place. Asynchronous learning is a methodology that is effective for skill-based practice individually when students in a class receive personalized, focused activities, conferences with teachers, time to practice and apply their skills, or work simultaneously on different activities that are either extension activities, enrichment opportunities, or interventions. Most online teaching happens asynchronously with synchronous learning taking place when there is a specific need for direct instruction or interaction. So in our Remote 2.0 model, we plan to include components of both synchronous learning, live, interactive, online learning through potentially video conferencing, but also asynchronous learning, which will provide opportunities for that independent application of knowledge, for the synthesization of what they are learning, for independent practice and the application of content skills that they are acquiring. Through the work of our subcommittees and our task force, we have made a commitment to increase the robustness of our programs in our new delivery of remote learning 2.0 while we are online. Our instruction in the classroom is heavily focused on balancing independent learning and collaborative practice, conferencing individually with students, providing small targeted group support, follow-up instruction, and allowing for peer feedback. These models will remain in our remote delivery in the 2.0 model. So we want to be clear that we plan to include synchronous learning, but remote learning does not imply students will be sitting in front of a computer with their teachers in live time from 8:30 a.m. until 3:30. As we know that we need to provide opportunities for time away from a screen, for movement breaks, for other types of learning to occur that are healthy and aligned to best instructional practices, regardless of the platform that we are in. So with that, those are our general updates, and we're happy to turn it over to either Dr. Cochran if there's anything else you would like to reference, or we'll turn it back to Dr. Farah.
I'm good, thank you. Nice job.
Okay, so I'm going to open the floor to questions from the board regarding the plan. We will be looking to move this plan forward. As Mrs. Allaire said, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to plug my computer in soon, so I'm going to turn over to Kristen. The metrics are changing. People that listened in on Tuesday, you will have had an idea of what those metrics are. The board will probably be discussing those a little bit more tonight. And Mrs. Allaire, actually, if you could pop those on the screen for us, I think that would be helpful for people to see. At this point, the plan here currently is to start with a cohort model on September 8th. And by that point, people will know whether they're planning to go solely remote or not. So there will be more coming out from the school. That's not really the board's purpose right now. The board's purpose right now is to take a look at the plan as it exists. These metrics are not in the current plan. I just looked at the updated plan. I don't think they're in there, but these will be considered part of the plan. So one of the things that I think the board might want to consider, because this was put together Tuesday and also presented Tuesday, is we are going to need to look at the updated guidance from the state that we just received. And Mrs. Allaire, if there's a fact sheet on that, it would be good if we could get that. So we will look to update the remote criteria when we go to remote based on New Hampshire DHS guidance. And I think also what I've talked to a couple board members, and the question is, will we ever go back totally, and when will we go back totally? And, you know, when our subcommittee looked at this, we looked at saying, we'll only go back totally if we can meet the CDC guidelines, or if the CDC revises them, and if the cases are under less than 0.1% of the total population. One of the things that we had considered was going back if the New Hampshire governor lifts the state of an emergency. And, you know, as I thought about it, and other people on the board that I've spoken to, you know, that kind of makes sense. We do want to follow the CDC guidelines because those are probably the most preventative and restrictive, and will keep us the safest and allow us to almost, as some states do, open up in stages, go with a cohort model, see how it goes. But when we get ready to leave that model or push towards a more 100%, I think we should be looking at the state, because New Hampshire is in a much better position right now than almost everywhere else in the country. So I would be looking for the 100% return if the New Hampshire governor lifts those order. So that's my comments on that. I'm going to turn it over to Kristen because I know she had something to say. I'm going to plug in my computer if you see me duck. So, Kristen?
All right, I apologize because my dog is barking in the background and there's not much I can do for that. So if she starts, my apologies. But Sandy and Brian, first of all, I want to say thank you to everyone. I mean, all the hard work that you've all done, not just Sandy and Brian clearly, but all the members that have been involved. You've put in tireless hours and we do appreciate everything you've done. So thank you very much. But what I wanted to do, it seems through social media, through comments I'm getting, people still are having a hard time grasping some of the very simple concepts of this entire plan. So I know a lot of people are listening tonight. So if we can just very simply answer a couple of questions for clarification. The hybrid plan that's being proposed, people will have the choice to either be in school or go remote, correct?
Sorry, Kristen, I was unmuting myself. So the hybrid plan includes a combination of in-school and remote learning. That is the hybrid plan. The choice for remote learning is a separate model or component of the plan. And so that could occur in two different ways. We are providing families the option to request 100% remote learning independent of the model that the district is in at the time.
Right.
So families can request that. We are asking and saying that we are requiring families to commit to that model for at the elementary through middle school level. That would be a commitment for the first marking period, which at those grade levels is a trimester. So from elementary school up through 8th grade, families who opt out of the district model for full remote learning would be committed to that model through the end of the first trimester. At the high school, we operate on quarters, but on semesters as well. So we have semester courses. So families at the high school level who opt into 100% remote learning would be committed to that model regardless of the district's choices on how we go as a district through the end of semester 1. That is the remote only option that we are allowing students and families to opt into. Okay. We also have remote learning as an option that the district may go into regardless of the choices that families are making. So an instance of that would be, as we were speaking to the metrics, if we as a district or a school encounter situations where we have a cluster of cases or an outbreak, which is the language that we're now receiving from the state, then we as a district or individual schools, depending on the nature of what is going on, may go into full 100% remote learning. That would be for all students and teachers, regardless of whether or not those individuals opted into full remote from the beginning of the year, if that makes sense. So the plan provides choice for families to opt into full remote for a specific predetermined length of time. And then those families who are not opting for that would then be in a situation to be moving between phases of the plan, depending on the external situations that are, or situation and indicators with regard to COVID that are happening in the community. So that's why those metrics where they would come into play. So should the board make a decision to start our year in the hybrid model, for those families that did not opt into 100% remote, we would be in a hybrid model where students would attend school 2 days in buildings and 3 days remotely. Those students would be assigned to a cohort, one of 2 cohorts. Depending on their cohort, they would attend school either on Monday and Tuesday and be in remote learning Wednesday through Friday. Or if they are in the opposite cohort, they would begin their week with remote learning from Monday through Wednesday and end their week Thursday and Friday in our school buildings. So that is the blended cohort model. That is part of our plan. However, our plan also includes options for full remote learning. Should, as a district or a school, we be required to move to that phase in conjunction with the level of spread and infections in our community and in the district in Greater Rockingham County. So I hope that helps to clarify. When we talk about full remote or remote learning, there are components of remote learning that are embedded in these different options, with the exception of the full 100% return to school buildings. So I hope that helps to answer. Sure.
Go ahead, Jen.
Sorry, I had a in hearing you speak about remote 2.0, I heard we will have the potential for video conferencing and that we will have opportunities for live instruction. How is that live instruction going to happen if there's only a potential for video conferencing?
So we have had task forces and subcommittees that have been working on what the remote 2.0 can look like. And we have kind of a general consensus amongst those groups to move to a model of remote learning that will integrate synchronous learning. We are actively planning to have conversations to finalize those plans with our teachers unions and our paraeducators early next week. But our plan is a proposal that integrates synchronous learning, the live delivery of instruction through video conferencing. Dr. Cochran, I don't know if you want to add to that at all. But.
I can a little bit. I mean, one of the things that we talked about was breaking the instruction out into sections at elementary and to some extent at the middle school level. We often use what's referred to as a workshop approach, where the teacher starts the instruction, then students will work in small groups and then progress from there to individual work. It's used a lot in reading and writing instruction, often referred to as the Lucy-Calkins model. And it's actually a pretty good model for implementation in a remote mode, because it does give some synchronous time where teachers can lecture or show a video or show a clip of a problem solving technique, and then they can work collaboratively either online or in their classroom, and from there you can go to the individual work. I think with the sudden move back in the spring, there was an awful lot of work that was not scaffolded because we did not have the model in place, and a lot of people ended up having a lot of work that more resembled the Blizzard bag model with a lot of independent work. And so what we're trying to do is retain those important functions of a traditional class instructional model, with teachers teaching, students receiving some direct instruction, students being also to be available, you know, in some small group activities, and trying to replicate the quality of instruction to the extent that we can from a normal school day.
All right, I'm going to go back a couple more basic questions before just for Sandy, because I do want, there's a lot of confusion out there and I just want to make sure people understand this. If we're in the hybrid model and we're moving forward, we can do that regardless of how many people choose to go remote, correct? We have the capabilities, we have the facilities to do that. So it doesn't matter, we don't need a certain percentage, because that confused people from the first meeting. So
yes, I spoke to that a little earlier. When I gave an example in a prior meeting, what I said was, I used some relatively round numbers, and what I said was, for example, in looking at the metrics, if 30% of students were remote, that would leave 70% to be divided into two groups, which would be 35 apiece. And I just gave it as an example. That was never stated as that was the metric that we would need. But some people did interpret it that way, and that's not a given metric. So we're pretty comfortable that regardless of the number, we should be able to do the hybrid model.
and if we do have a extremely large percentage that do choose to go remote, is there any changes that we could see with this hybrid model to get the kids in school more than the 2 days that's being proposed?
It would be hard within the model to have more than 2 days a week, because then you're having more than, you know, that percentage of students in. I was pleased that we're able to get metrics and have talks about, you know, what would the situation have to be like to bring everyone back? Is it conceivable? Yes. We haven't looked at it from a model perspective, but we are looking at what we would have to hit in terms of being able to bring everyone back at some point in time.
So that is
Mrs. Savage, I'm sorry, could I just sort of add on that? So I think when you say, would we be able to, I think, you know, we have made a decision that we are adhering and abiding by CDC guidelines. And there are certain parameters that are in the CDC guidelines that we would have to adhere to. So 6-foot distancing, for example. There are other risk mitigation factors that the CDC guidelines include that we would be implementing in our plan. That being said, the CDC identifies different levels of risk that are associated with different levels of gatherings of individuals. So our plan was put together to prioritize health and safety in accordance with the CDC. And so each of these models that we are talking about, full return, blended hybrid cohort model, and full remote, was purposely designed to align to a different level of risk in association with the reopening of schools. So when we look at decreasing the populations of students and the numbers of students gathering in our buildings, that then does affect the level of risk. But that being said, there is still risk. So the plan and the introduction speaks to the idea of risk mitigation through layers of protection and prevention strategies. So our goal is to adhere to the guidelines through measures that proactively reduce risk to keep our staff, our professionals, and our students and their families, whom they go home to every day, as safe as we can, knowing that we cannot possibly eliminate 100% risk. So questions saying, can we get back in? In the blended model, we can, we believe, get in and meet the 6-foot distancing guidelines and implement levels of mitigation. But the question still remains, what is the level of risk that we as a district are willing to take on? And what do we want to prioritize in terms of what we feel is most important as a district and what we are willing to implement. So, as we have more students opting into remote, and then we would have more space in our classrooms, and that could enable us to potentially fit more students. But then we look at guidelines around large gatherings. So it's a balancing act. And I understand there are certain bulleted things we might look at. Can we do this? Can we do this? And sometimes the answer may appear simple, a simple yes to some of those, but there are many other questions that connect to this with regard to this disease and the pandemic. So it's a very complicated situation. So I think to answer your question, we believe we can safely fit students and staff and maintain 6-foot difference distancing in the blended model, but there is still risk that we would be assuming with that model. So I just wanted to make sure that we're addressing that and speaking to that as well.
Thank you very much. Another quick question. Many people are worried that we're not addressing IEPs, athletics, band, many different things. You've all been busy on concentrating on the reopening of schools. What assurances can you give the people that are all listening that these are things that are being looked into? I don't know who wants to answer that.
Yeah, I was.
We have been obviously having conversations, especially the two large groups included, parents and community members, paraprofessionals, teachers, administrations, in some cases, board members. And one of the things that we're aware of is the fact that special education, we had more struggles than we had anticipated in the spring. We are actively working on the models that Sandy Allaire just described, but at the same point in time, we're looking at some of the barriers that we had with respect to expectations and rules out of the Department of Education. We have set up negotiations regarding an MOU with both the TSSU and the TTA next week, teachers and paras, looking to find a solution to those problems that prevented us from delivering at the level that we wanted to. We believe that we can do that, and we're looking forward to finding out where we are next week and being able to share that. I can assure you that the people involved in terms of case managers, paraprofessionals, classroom teachers last year, we're not satisfied with what we're able to do for a bunch of reasons, and have committed themselves fully to working together to try and greater support our identified students this year. So we have those conversations next week. We know what some of the technical issues are. We have some ideas. We're looking forward to working with teacher representatives and paraprofessional representatives to find some solutions that work for everybody, that keep us compliant with DOE and other requirements, and providing high levels of service for all identified students, regardless of which model that they're in.
Mrs. Savage, I would just add, because you also referenced athletics, music, other activities. Mr. Fantasia was with us last Thursday evening to give us an update relative to athletics in conjunction with the NHIAA. He is actively involved in multiple groups and task forces at the state level with regard to athletics, fall sports, and he is in an ongoing manner providing us with updates as to decisions that are occurring through that organization. In terms of music, Mr. DiBartolomeo is also on our task forces, and we had, in one of our administrative meetings this week, we did discuss the music program and options. He has been actively planning for ways to ensure that students in our classes, band, chorus, orchestra, at the secondary level, but also the elementary level, to have options for those students. Those are larger classes, as you all know, I believe. We're looking at spacing requirements in the PAC on the capacity that we can fit in the auditorium, in our classroom spaces, whether or not we can use the extended area outside behind the PAC when weather permits to facilitate time for those students to gather safely and practice. That is ongoing. And I know Mr. Bartolomeo is awaiting this evening's decision to move forward with that planning, depending on the model that the board should choose to adopt.
Thank you. And the last question that I have in relation to all this, when the parents have to choose whether or not to go remote, or if they want to go remote or have the children in school for the model, will this information, is it the hope to have this information, such as what we're doing with IEPs and things of that nature, out to the parents so that they have that prior to making the choice? And part two of that same thing is with high school students, will they know which classes and which teachers will be teaching those classes remote before they have to decide whether they want to be in school or remote themselves?
Unfortunately, with regard to your second question that I'll address first, we are not able to do that. So our ability to provide those classes and the full program is contingent upon the choices that are made by our families. And so in many cases, and we mentioned this the other evening, but in meeting with the high school administration and our director of counseling, we've had conversations around some of our elective classes that are singletons. We refer to them because they are offered in one section only. We know that those may be problematic in terms of scheduling, depending on the number of students who are enrolled, who may choose remote or hybrid, vice versa. And so, we have had conversations actively to problem solve to how we can handle those. And we've discussed looking at those as potentially remote only sections, regardless of the choice that students and families make. And if we are able to do that, then they could run remotely for children, students who opt into remote only learning, but we could provide remote access to the students who are in our buildings. It's not an ideal situation, but given the differentiation of our course options and the selections and the variety in schedules that our students have, it's a situation that we will have to face once we have that information. And unfortunately, we can't provide that information until we have the data on options that people are selecting. We know that puts people in a very difficult situation. We're aware of that, and we understand that, and we sympathize with that. We're actively working together to try to problem solve that. But that will be something that will require really all hands on deck and a great deal of strategizing and problem solving to try to provide the best case schedules for all students, depending on the model that they choose.
As much as we would like to do that, the reality is that if we produce schedules, and it's going to be a very labor and time intensive piece, especially at the high school level. If we produce a schedule and then say, now pick whether you're remote or not, everything goes away. And we could do that 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, and we'd always be in the same situation, that no matter what we create, we create it based on, we have to create it based on knowing what the commitment is in the first place. Otherwise, you're creating something that by definition is not usable. Because if we create a schedule and students don't go in one way or another, then we don't know we can't manage the class size, we can't manage the location, we can't manage the time. So all of those things are going to be determined by administration based on people locking into their decisions for those timeframes. There's no way to do it otherwise.
Thank you. Kim, do you want?
Sure. I think Barbara had a question, and then I'll move on. But before we do that, I'm sorry. Can we get back to the metrics? I just want the board to weigh in on the thought that I just had regarding 100% return. If we include there, if New Hampshire drops the state of emergency. People agreeable to that Do I hear any disagreement? Okay, and then, oh, who was that?
That was me.
What's your disagreement?
And that is an option of 100% return, correct?
Excuse me?
Is that 100% return option?
Yeah.
So that's no remote at all.
Well, if people have already chosen remote, they would have to stay committed for that, whatever that time period is, the rest of this, you just, the teachers, I know as a teacher, you can't then switch it back.
No, I know, I'm not asking that. I'm asking if the state lifts the state of emergency and we're allowing children to go back 5 days a week, are we still allowing kids to stay remote after that?
My answer to that would be yes, because you're in an online class and you need to finish that out because the teacher has already made a plan for how they're going to deliver that content. Mrs. Allaire, jump in here. That was my opinion. Let's Sandy jump in there.
Yes, so when families select the remote only option, they're committing for, again, at the elementary or middle level, trimester or semester, that's right. Regardless of where the district model is in. No, I hear where you're coming from. So regardless of whether the district is in full remote, blended hybrid, or if we ever get to a point where we are in a full return, those families who opted for full remote will remain in full remote through the end of that marking period.
But what about the rest of the year is what I'm asking. Because you still have people out there who have family members that, you know, may be compromised, who feel that they want to still keep their kids home. I mean, we've got the gamut in this district. We've got people who want 5 days. We got people who are good with hybrid. You've got people who are great with remote. But if you go back 5 days and the people who are great with remote have people who are compromised and still don't feel they're comfortable, what happens then? I guess that's my question.
So, Mrs. Lewis, the commitment is for that length of time with an opportunity to renew and continue in that for either the second trimester or the third, depending on where we're at in the year, or the second semester at the high school level. So, you know, we're trying to provide flexibility for families who are in a different situation where at the beginning of the year, they may be apprehensive to send their kids back to school buildings.
Correct.
And then depending on the conditions, they may have a change in their decision. So we wanted to build in opportunities for in either direction for families to either move in or out of full remote learning.
Beautiful. That's all I wanted to know.
Sure.
Then I would be for it if everybody had a choice. Still, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and the choice has to occur at a time at the end of the grading period, because if we're gonna move students around, we also need to be able to move teachers around.
Correct.
So after, if the emergency order is lifted, it's not like the next day everybody goes back. There'll be a period where we have to adjust.
But the remote students need to stay remote till the end of whatever that marking period. There will be an adjustment period, yeah, clearly. So let me hang on. Sarah has her hand up, so I'll do Sarah, then Sean, then I think back to Barbara.
I never got my question.
Okay, let me go Barbara, then Sarah, then Sean.
All right, so this goes on to the remote. First, I want to thank Sandy and everybody else who's been on the task force for doing an outstanding job. There's just a multitude of details and variables, and thank you for sticking in there and getting that all communicated. So I have a question about remote. One of the questions that I keep hearing is how many hours of synchronous learning are we targeting for, say, the elementary schools if you go remote for the remote learners?
So, you know, that's a complex question. There's not a simple, straightforward answer to that. So, you know, the instructional approach and the delivery, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, is going to be reflected of the teachers who are professionals and who, whether we are in buildings or online, make their professional decision as to whether or not synchronous or asynchronous learning is the appropriate instructional approach for the content, skills, competencies that they are working on at that time with their students. So we will have a schedule in place that will be a frame of times when teachers have opportunities for synchronous and asynchronous learning. But depending on the lessons and the scope and sequence of the learning at the time, if students are engaged in active research, for example, and they are working more independently, that might not be appropriate to have students meeting online as a whole class synchronously, having live instruction delivered to them 100% of the day. That time would be more effectively used with students working asynchronously, their independent work and the application of what they're learning. So it will be, those two models will be used interchangeably by our teachers in the remote approach. So I understand people are looking for a commitment to say this is going to be different than what we had in the spring, which did not include the live delivery of instruction or synchronous learning. And we understand that, and we feel confident in saying that it will not be what we experienced in the spring. It will be different. We will be able to provide synchronous learning, but we also don't think it's appropriate or healthy to ask our teachers and students to sit in front of a computer screen and be engaged in live instructional delivery for 7¼ hours nonstop. So, you know, we have a staff of professional educators who are highly trained and have expertise in the best instructional approaches in connection with the developmental level of the students that they teach, the content area that they teach, and down to the skills that are contained in those competencies and the content. So, you know, we need to trust our professionals to adjust between synchronous and asynchronous learning, that they will use synchronous learning and deliver live instruction when it is appropriate to do so, but they will also incorporate asynchronous and independent opportunities for students to apply what they're learning and then give them feedback and extra help as needed. I hope that helps. I understand people are looking for a minimum standard. And really the minimum standard we propose is daily interaction for the purpose of attendance and check-ins and lessons. It'll look different at the elementary and secondary levels, but we also need to trust our professionals and allow them to determine what's appropriate for their students at the time.
But there's no chance that it'll be zero synchronous learning for the whole semester or trimester?
No.
Good.
Can I just add on to that, Sandy? Because I think that we hear a lot about synchronous learning, and that's what we're talking about, that connectivity, right? And being able to connect with your teacher and connect with peers. And when we talk about synchronous, being that teacher and student are in the same place at the same time, for our elementary students, in many cases, if you have a class of 20, that's not manageable to be the most effective instruction. So it's actually the asynchronous model, meaning that I'm taking smaller groups. So not everyone at the same time, but smaller groups at different times in order to meet their needs. And so for us, asynchronous in many ways is the same connectivity that people are asking for in synchronous learning, because we're talking about being able to connect and deliver instruction based on need of individuals or small groups.
But they'll be able to see the teacher.
Yes.
Yes, but as points out, we'll be able to differentiate and target. It just won't be in a whole class setting.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah?
Okay. So just to kind of go back to the specific metric that you had mentioned, Kim, about the dropping of the state of emergency as a goal or as a key standard to return back to school 100%. I'm not necessarily against that, because I do understand the desire for that specific standard, a specific goal line, but my concern is there are a lot of families, I'm sure, who are on the fence. As far as, like, for me, I will probably do the hybrid model, but I would not be comfortable with my son going back 100% because of compromised family members. So I'm sure there are a number of families that are in that situation. So my concern is there being an increased pressure on for the next semester or the next trimester of people flipping to online remote learning, which may be a much higher percentage than was in the fall or in the first semester, and how our teachers and our staff and our administration might handle that flip. It's just a concern I have of there being additional pressure on teachers to suddenly try to handle both in-school teaching and a remote learning, not having enough teachers to meet the demand for remote learning if a number of families change their request. And just wondering, I guess, if that has been discussed, like how that might be handled if a larger number of families change their mind and go from in-school to remote.
So just kind of to summarize what you're saying that we change that metric, the state lists the order, and then a lot of parents, students say, oh no, I was okay with coming back blended, but now I'm not okay because there's too many kids in the school. How are we going to handle that? That's the question?
Yeah, basically, because that's what I see as a potential of happening.
That's
my only.
I have to kind of. It's tough to say at this point. I'm trying to think about how to. I think what would have to happen is that, and Mrs. Allaire and Dr. Cochran, you can agree or not agree, is that we would still attempt to honor those requests because that would still be there's still a COVID emergency at the national level or guidelines that are different. So that would be my thought, is that if we did that and then all of a sudden we had another 20% that wanted to move to remote, that we'd have to accommodate that, but with the understanding that if that were going to happen, you couldn't do that overnight either. It would have to, if we saw that, we probably would have to stay in the blended model until the end of a quarter and then move into 100% and allow for that transition to happen. That would be how I would handle it. If we were going 100%, then I think that's how you'd have to handle it. You'd have to do it at the end of a period so everybody had the time to adjust. Administrators, what do you think?
At the high school level, the only time I could see that happening would be mid-year, at the end of the first semester, the end of a grading period, because you're talking about essentially rescheduling the second half of the year, starting with the same students and teachers, but in a different capacity. It's going to be very difficult to do at any other time because of the moving parts, and still allow students to earn credit for a half credit or a quarter credit or full credit.
That's my primary concern with setting that, is just there being an increased pressure or pressure point on remote requests if families aren't, they're comfortable with the hybrid, they're comfortable with the limited cohorts, the smaller class sizes and stuff, but going 100% is just too risky. They're not comfortable for whatever reason. And then in that mid-year time frame or whatever, we're faced with a much larger request than before, and just being able to meet that successfully for those students and for the teachers.
It's in the worst case scenario, when let's say we end up with a significant spike in numbers and have to go to fully remote, we essentially take the model that we have with this, the combination of teachers and students, and those that are in hybrid move to a fully remote model. So there's really no way to decouple that at any point except mid-year when the grading period is over. So that coupling is there at least for the entire first semester, because there's no way to decouple it and still be able to grant credit.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Sure.
Sure, Jen, go ahead.
So that sounds like we're saying that we cannot even consider going back fully until after the Christmas break. It wouldn't be a consideration. I mean, is that what I'm hearing?
If in a particular building you wanted to move everybody back, it would mean taking the remote cohorts, some of which are being taught by teachers who may not be able to teach face-to-face because of medical reasons, and making them teach in classrooms.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm not, when I say fully back, I'm talking about going from a 2-day model to a 5-day model.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying we have.
I know what Jen's saying, and Dr. Cochran knows. You're not, it's the kids that are remote, even if you go back 100% remote, have to stay remote till the end of a grading period. But
that I understand.
Yeah, I know. I know what you're saying, Jen. Now, if you're in a blended model and all of a sudden we say we're going back 100%.
Well, not 100%, but we're going back 5 days because.
Going back 5 days, yeah.
The metrics, because the metrics indicate that it is safer for us to go back 5 days at this point. So those kids can go from blended to 5 days, correct?
They should be able to, yes.
Yes. I think there was part of that was what Sarah was asking about.
Yes.
If there was now a huge increase in the kids who wanted to go remote, like that would be more difficult in October. You know, I think what Dr. Cochran was trying to allude to is if you had a spike in then the kids who wanted to go remote, that adds a whole new layer of challenge to it. But if you had no new kids going 100% remote, and you know the kids that were in the blended model just shifted over to 100% return, it can be done.
So I guess the answer to your question is no, Jen. So if we moved from blended to 100% return, that doesn't, you don't have to do that after a semester.
Okay, thank you.
But to Sarah's point, I can understand what she's saying in that there's a concern that the state lists the guidelines, but see nationally you still have this concern. How are you going to handle that? And I think we're being very conservative in our approach. And I would hope that with the conservative bent that we're taking as we move from one level to another, that you would not see huge numbers of people, like 10, 20%. I know what you're saying, Sarah, but I would hope that would be few and far between. I mean, we're being very conservative as we move from one level to another. And we're already, people that are concerned in my mind are already, if it were me, I would already be going with the remote just so I didn't have to worry about that switch. That's just my thoughts on it. So Sheila, anything else on the metrics before we move? Oh, Brian, sorry. Brian, and then Sheila before we move on.
Is he stuck?
Brian, you need to unmute.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. First of all, I'm happy with and I want to compliment the task force and all the staff for all the work they did. I know you guys have been working an awful lot to make this happen, to get us to this point tonight. And I think it's good for the Timberland community that they are being offered a choice. And me personally, my concern is actually just the opposite of Sarah's, that I think we do have the good fortune right now of being in New Hampshire, and statistically, we're almost non-existent, statistically speaking, what's going on in COVID compared to the rest of the country. That being said, I understand that there are those people and their families that if that's a concern of yours, then you should address it. If you feel that it's the best thing for your son or daughter to be educated remotely, then I'm glad that Timberlane Regional School District can offer you that choice. I am among the group that I would again, I'm glad to see we have a choice. I'd like to see as many students in these buildings as possible, get as many students on the athletic field and the music programs as possible, because to me, this is all part of your education here. And there's certain things that you just can't achieve, no matter who that instructor is, by doing things remote. And I know a lot of these kids at all age groups, that they're starving to get back into the classroom and get back with their friends. Thanks.
If we look at the different iterations of what could happen, we know that parents who choose fully remote for their students will be fully remote for whatever the duration is. But if you think of what the model is, the district will decide, the administration will recommend to the board at a given time. We start as the students who are not remote will be in a hybrid model. If the metrics progress over time that we feel we can meet whatever guidance is in place and bring everybody back, we bring them back. And so the remote people are still remote, and the in-school people would move from hybrid to fully in school. If the curve starts to come up again, we would move back to a hybrid model, try and stabilize. Hopefully we wouldn't have to do that, but that would be the choice back and forth. If the metrics really degraded, we could move everybody to fully online. But if we do the hybrid successfully, we are, have the social distancing and the masks and the other layers of risk mitigation, we should be able to maintain that hybrid. It would be a very, and Mr. Boyle points out, it would be a very significant change for what's happening in New Hampshire to be in the situation where, we wouldn't be able to offer the hybrid. It's possible, but if we manage the situation right, respond appropriately when the situation changes and respond relatively early, we should be able to avoid that and maintain both of those models. If other school districts, other counties around us blow up, then it's only a matter of time. And that would be the situation where we would have to consider everybody back to remote. But we can't take this lightly and change back and forth multiple times. But if we show stability and a direction over time that justifies bringing all kids back, then I think we should do it, but we need to do it carefully, and we need to do it with fidelity. And we have to make very clear the expectations of students in terms of how they must conduct themselves if they're going to be allowed to be with their peers in classrooms.
Okay, thank you. Sean, did you have a question? Did I miss your question?
No, it actually was got answered in the it was a offshoot of Sarah's, but I'm all set.
Okay. So as I said, we do have some tweaking to do on the whole when we go to 100% remote based on the new guidance. So we'll have to, I'm still looking to a motion to approve the plan, but we will come back to that next week after I have a better idea of what the administration needs, what we need to go in there based on the new guidance. So Sheila?
I had a couple of things.
Okay.
I really hope, and I'm really hoping, because I was able to see firsthand, Sandy, what an elementary student was getting. Firsthand. I was in the room, I saw it. And there has to be synchronized learning. And I absolutely agree with you, what you're saying. There's professionals, but this child was done his work by Wednesday at noon, 2 times talked to his teacher a week, got an hour, touching base, how are you? And they played a little game. That's the instruction that was given by the actual professional. However, the same child also came in and did math enrichment, 6th grade math enrichment. Complete 180. I was so impressed with that math enrichment. I can't even tell you how impressed I was with those 2 ladies. They were fantastic. It went without a hitch. They got breaks in between. They were learning. They were catching up. So there's definitely a difference in my world, and I got to see it firsthand. My other biggest concern is our transition kids, 5th grade to 6th, 8th grade to 9th. I'm a little concerned when we're gonna be lacking on the Chromebooks to give these kids, because we know incoming 6th graders get new Chromebooks, incoming 9th graders get Chromebooks, and our seniors left with theirs. So I'm a little concerned that we're not gonna have enough to give these kids that are gonna need them going into their transition years. And my other thing is, so I'd like to know what's the game plan for those kids, if we have a game plan for those kids, because it's a new environment, it's scary. Whether they're remote or going in the hybrid or what, we couldn't have a move-up day, we couldn't have an open house. It's gonna be difficult to transition those kids, and I'm worried about them. The other thing, which has been mentioned numerous times, is the athletics and the music. Anybody who's had a child in music like I had for a million years, and Kim's had, know it's just not only the 6 feet apart, but we've got definite SPIC concerns in band. And we have, chorus concerns, singing. So I am looking for something to come back to the parents, some kind of a protocol that's going to be followed once we figure it out, so that these parents can rest assured that everybody's not around any spit when it comes to music. I also feel the same way about athletics. Once that gets squared up, and I know it's an ongoing thing, just to give parents an idea of how the athletics is going to be handled here, spectators here. I think, it's huge. Athletics are huge here. And so isn't music. It's a big population of our kids, especially at the high schools. So that's all. That was my whole piece.
Okay, thank you. So I'm sure we'll have an update on music and athletics as we move forward. I anticipate. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. May I quickly address the transition question? Because I'm sure that's a concern that many parents have and students as they're moving to new buildings. Our schools are actively having conversations administratively right now for how to provide opportunities to introduce the students to their schools. The middle school, for example, is thinking about a digital tour and a video to welcome their new 6th grade students and all middle school students. They're having a lot of discussions around transition as they're looking at ways to build community in new ways, especially for students who are remote. Introduce them to their teachers, to their new peers as they filter together from our 4 towns into a regional middle school. And the high school is having similar conversations to replicate something similar to what they typically do for freshman orientation and their parents.
I know in the middle school, Sandy, they did do a virtual tour for the kids, back in June, I think. They got on with the guidance counselors and so forth.
Right.
But you also have to remember they're 6th graders and they can't remember what that score was on Fortnite the night before.
Sure.
So this is my concern. I mean,
no, they have a new one coming. They understand that. So repetition is good for them, and they wanted to reintroduce them. They're putting together videos of hallways, administrators giving them tips for middle school life and how to acclimate themselves to the middle school. So our teams are actively working on strategies to make sure that our students feel welcome to our schools and comfortable, and with whichever platform that they're in. In terms of the Chromebooks, I know Mr. Henderson is on this call. I don't know if he has any update with regard to Chromebooks as they pertain to our 6th graders and our 9th graders. But I wanted to give him an opportunity if he does have any information to jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. Nothing really new from last time. From Tuesday night, we talked about how we are getting devices for every student in the district. As we've talked about, there's extreme shipping delays because of COVID. That all being said, we did not ask for those Chromebooks back from parents and students that had picked them up during the spring but needed them for remote learning. And we'll put out more information for those that would need devices to start the year if those new Chromebooks have not come in yet. It's certainly my hope that we have them by the start of school, but it's very iffy right now. So we will, anybody that needs a device, we'll do more pickup events in the meantime.
Well, that's what I'm basically asking, is because some kids didn't need them last year, but situations might have changed going into 6th grade, and now they do need one. So,
absolutely, so if those new devices do not come in, we will put out more surveys, more information to parents, letting them know. But we can get them devices, and we'll have, like I said, we'll have some more pickup events for them.
And the only other thing I wanted to ask you, Ken, and I'm glad you jumped on, did we ever get those hotspots that we ordered, that we approved?
We talked about hotspots. We only
I thought they were in there, weren't they?
It was the Chromebooks that we approved, and the tablets, the student devices. That being said, we're still looking at those hotspots, and we have, of course, the CARES money and some other grant money we're looking at. So I guess, I'll talk to Jeff about, the grant money we have available and what we can use it for.
Well, I know we did have kids with connection problems, if I remember correctly, last year. So I just want to make sure that we're, putting our best foot forward this year for the kids that are remote and that may need them.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so in summary, we're looking to move the plan forward as it stands now with the way the state is in terms of COVID. What this would mean, if everything stays static, is that on September 8th, we would move to this blended model, and half the students would be going 2 days and the other half would be going 2 days. And prior to that, we'll be looking for parents to commit to fully remote if that is their desire. We are not looking at this point at going back to 100% return. So, and we will continue, we will bring back the metrics for next time, but I'm entertaining a motion to accept the plan as written if there's not any more discussion.
I'll make the motion to accept the reopening plan as presented by the administration.
Jen makes a motion. Who's second? Was that Barbara? Barbara seconds. Any further discussion? Kat, could you take a roll call on this, please?
Mr. Boyle,
Yes.
Mr. Doobie,
Yes.
Dr. Farah,
Yes.
Mrs. Kishka,
Yes.
Ms. Lowe's,
Yes.
Mrs. Mockmer,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill.
We already got the votes right now to pass. This motion's already passed.
Yes or no?
I am going to be voting no on this because I do want an option that the people were given. They have the remote option, and the best that I believe that we have on the table right now for a litany of reasons is the 40% in the classroom. And I think that vastly disenfranchises our students, in my opinion. And I don't want the public in the future to know that this board was totally in support of this, because I know a lot of us board members have a lot of reservations with this, and therefore I want it to be known on the record. and I vote no.
Mrs. Savage.
I'm just gonna kind of follow up what Sean said. I mean, granted, I don't think this is ideal and what we all want, but I'm looking at it as it gets the kids that want to be in the school, and it gives them something, which is better than nothing. So ideally, I'd love to see them all back in 5 days a week. I'd love to see it back the way it was. But I feel that that's out of our control at this time. So for that reason, I'm voting yes.
Mrs. Silva.
I was going to say the exact same thing that Kristen said. Sean, I appreciate, you wanting the kids back in 5 days, but if we don't go forward with this model, which is no option to get the kids back in, so I'm going to vote in favor of this plan.
Okay, so the motion carries 8-1. Thank you. And thank you to all, everybody. And we will be.
Can I just say thank you so much? Sandy, Lucy, Mark, you here somewhere. Anybody else who is involved, please, my humble thanks for all the work, because we know, I don't think you've slept in months, Sandy. So, and Lucy, and just thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would just say we certainly appreciate that. We are the ones here, but there was an army of other people working on this with us. And so
thank you goes out to all of them. It's just that we know this has been difficult.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Sorry, Kim.
Okay, no problem, because I had muted myself and forgot to unmute. So that ends that part of the discussion. So we're going to be moving on to the end of year financials so that we can make a decision on the unreserved fund balance to move forward. So Mr. Dowd, if you could unmute and we can talk about the end of year financials that should be in your agenda packets, board members. I know I have a few questions, but go ahead, Jeff.
Sure. All right, Kim, so I've shared out my screen and I've updated the end of year financials, just to a few of those changes that we've made over the course of the week. As numbers continue to move around a little bit. Again, I'm presenting in this format so that we're able to get a good view on all of our funds in a consolidated manner. The general fund, the 100 fund, 210 fund, the 220 fund, federal grants fund, and the 500 fund, which is our performing arts fund. So you can see all of them consolidated to get you a better idea, a better picture of what the revenue would be for the district, our expenditures, our beginning fund balance, expenditures, beginning fund balance plus revenues less expenditures. We add in our prior year encumbrances, subtract out our current year encumbrances, and we come out with a fund balance, a spendable fund balance of 1.941 million or 1.942 million. We do have a fund balance this year of 500,000, and so we have available for consideration of fund balance retention of 2.441 million to almost 2.442 million, 2,442,000 overall. I also did provide the detailed financials that you're used to seeing, which cover the 100 fund, both revenue and expenditure perspective as well. Certainly, if there are any questions on any of those lines, those areas, I'm happy to address them. I know that fund balance retention is the next item on your agenda, and as part of the year-end summary at the bottom, I did include the fund balance retained language that is put out by the DRA so that it could be helpful in determining what the amount is, if any, the board would like to retain going into next year. That fund balance retention is an amount that is held by the district. It's not a budgeted amount. It's an amount that's available for use by the district in the event of an emergency under certain criteria with approval. And typically the idea would be that our funds have run out. This is money that's not returned to the towns, and I'll say returned to the towns, essentially taken off the school assessment going forward as we look to set rates this fall. So if there are any questions on the year-end summary, the financials, or any questions you may have.
Yes. I have a question on the 4600 lines.
Yes.
Can you explain why we were over by about 600,000 between those two lines?
You know, and it's a great question, Kim, and I'll say that when we look at this from a budgetary perspective, the GL budget that's listed matches the voted budget of 73,078,676.
Mhm.
Those lines, if you recall, had significant encumbrances from the prior year. So we had set aside some funding at the end
Okay.
of last
Got
year,
it.
roofs and things like that. So
Okay.
we add that in.
Got it. Okay. Sheila?
Oh, Jeff, I'm so confused. So hang in
How
with
can I
me
help?
for a second. I'm looking at a $4,500,000 ending balance, right? So now I'm seeing that we overexpended by what? $1,000,001 is what you're saying? Because our expenditures can compared to our revenue.
Well, don't forget, Sheila, that we had a beginning fund balance of 3.284 million, which is right here.
Right.
So that.
So we actually didn't go over.
We didn't go over, no.
Okay.
No, and it's okay. In fact, it's I don't want to say it's good, but when we have a fund balance like that, that's the amount that we used to offset taxes last year, and
right.
Yeah, and that's why it's so tough to look at this from a revenue and expenditure perspective. So I'm always careful, and I want to present in the manner that you see, in the format that you see, to be able to say, well, what's our beginning fund balance in addition to our revenues compared to what our expenditures are, and then we still need to look at those encumbrances.
So that encumbrance of 1819, is that the back wall? Is that the back?
No, those were some roofs and different projects that we undertook over a year ago.
Okay. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is how did I go from 4,500,000 down to 24?
So if you turned, and I believe that you're referring to the Timberlane expenditures page, and if you look at that last column, that last page in that last column,
yeah,
everything that's captured on that report, that Timberlane expenditures report, is from the 100 fund, and you'll see that if you look at account that 100,522,1,930 account, which is our food service fund, we had a budget at the 100 fund level. So in other words, we budgeted that fund would spend or have available to spend 1.4 million.
Right.
You'll see that the total that we are showing year to date is 208,281. That amount that we actually spent year to date is the contribution that we actually had to make to the fund.
Okay.
So this, and that's the actual expense out of the general fund. Everything else is captured in the food service fund, which is why, looking at it on this schedule from a consolidated fund perspective is a little bit more helpful, I think. I think that looking at that Timberlane expenditures report gives us a great idea where we are.
Right, and that's why I was looking for it, because this is where we were for the end of last year, which, we went into COVID, we had all kinds of emergencies, we had to spend money, we had to, and this is why I wanted to see this, to make a good decision on what we're going to keep in there for the next year. The other question I had was, and this is going to sound really crazy, but there is a line in here, and now I'm looking for it, so forgive me. And I've gone past it, I know I have. I apologize. Okay, the 100,26110 line. Now, I know where this came from, but I'm trying to figure out how we don't budget for something but overspend it. There's a zero budgeted for that line.
That's on the page marked page 5, zero budget, and that is the, excuse me, that's the facilities director position that was approved by the board. Not quite at the beginning of the year.
Whoa. The facilities director or the facilities supervisor?
No, that was the facilities director.
That's the director for a partial year?
Correct.
Okay, That's what I needed to know.
Yep.
Thank you so much, because it says supervisor, so I'm thinking it was that line.
No, in that object code where it reads 100, 2610, and then 111. That 111 is typically an administrator type object code.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Great question. Thank you, Sheila.
Okay, any other questions on the end of year financials? We need to move to fund balance retention.
Kim?
Oh, I'm sorry, Barbara, sorry. Go ahead.
So I'm trying to figure out if we make the motion at the end about retaining 1.17 million, does that include the 500,000 that was mentioned above about it'll be released unless renewed?
Exactly. So
It does include it.
No, the 1172 right now our fund balance retention from this year's fund balance going into next year is 0. So I see that it's 500 in that it's been released. Consider it released when we close the books. It's not spendable, but it's released. So if you took no action tonight, there'd be 0 fund balance retained going into next year. If you wanted to retain the maximum fund balance retention that you could, it would be that 1172 808. And if you retain that, that would be it. It's not an accumulating fund.
Okay.
So Barbara, if we retain that, then we would be taking the difference between 2441 minus 1172 and returning that to the voters. In contrast, which is what, about, I don't know, 1.3 million. I think last year we returned maybe, Jeff, what's the number we returned to the voters last year?
Beginning fund balance here is showing as 3,284,921. So 3,284,921.
So my recommendation would be that we retain the same amount of fund balance as we did last year, which is 500,000.
Which we didn't end up spending anyway.
Correct, and you can't spend that unless you run through the rest of your budget.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll motion according to RSA 1984B2 or 11, notwithstanding any other provision of a law, a school district by a vote of the legislative body may authorize indefinitely until specific precision.
Barbara, you don't. Sorry, I don't want to. We don't have to include all that in the motion. We typically just say. I would just suggest a motion that we retain 500,000 in the balance and the
Okay.
So it's up to you if you want to put
Okay,
all the language.
I would like to retain 500,000, motion to retain 500,000 in the fund balance.
I'll second that.
Who's that? Was that Brian?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, Kat, could you take a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Boyle,
Yes.
Mr. Doobie,
Yes.
Dr. Farah,
Yes.
Mrs. Pishka,
Yes.
Ms. Lowe's,
Yes.
Mrs. Mockmer,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Mrs. Savage,
Yes.
Mrs. Silva.
Jen's connection got lost, so I don't believe she's coming back.
Okay. So moving on to the administrator's report and then the personnel report, Dr. Cochran, I'll turn over to you.
I think people have heard more than enough from me tonight. I just wanted to speak a little bit to the process. I got brought in just under 3 weeks ago. And I have to say, I sat in on multiple task force meetings, and I just wanted to thank the task force members, whether they were community, staff, administration, or professionals brought in. Great conversations with the nurses the other day. And the level of thoughtfulness and dialogue in those task force meetings was very impressive. And what I most appreciated was that people advocated for their ideas, and they wanted to do the best that they could for our students, even though we didn't always agree on what that looked like. But it was good to see people feeling comfortable advocating from a perspective, and other people willing to listen, but then at times have to agree to disagree in terms of perspectives. I have to say I've been extremely impressed with the desire to do that. with the amount of time and effort and energy put in. And I think we're moving forward with a good plan. How this plays out over time will be subject in many ways to what we do in schools, but in some ways it'll be impacted by what happens outside the schools in our local community and also in our area of the state and the state as a whole. So I've really felt that I've had a chance to come in and look around, just appreciative of all the administrators that I had to get a chance to meet in such a short period of time. Just super impressed with the skill level, their ability to collaborate, their knowledge of students, and you know, the way they've handled this. I am super looking forward to meeting teachers, being in schools the first of the school year, social distancing and with my mask on, I promise. But for those of us who got into this business, what we love are schools and teachers and students and paras and seeing the hub of learning. And I've missed that since March, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it in a few short weeks. So thank you so much for the support that I've been given since I've been here, and I want to congratulate the task force administration and all those who participated. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving on to the personnel report. I don't know if Mrs. Allaire is going to do this or Dr. Cochran.
I have the personnel report, nominees of Lauren Beliveau at North Sandown, 1-year assignment is grade 4. And Colin DeFries at the middle school in technology education.
Kim, I'll motion to accept those nominations.
Okay, Sheila motions to accept the 2 professional nominations. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Sean seconds. Kat, could you take a roll call, please?
Mr. Boyle,
Yes.
Mr. Doobie,
Yes.
Dr. Farah,
Yes.
Ms. Kishka,
Yes.
Ms. Lowe's,
Yes.
Mrs. Mockamer,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Mrs. Savage,
Yes.
Mrs. Silva,
She's gone.
She's gone. She's gone. All right, we have one other here.
One other action to approve a year-long leave of absence for Elizabeth Bisbing from Atkinson Academy, special education teacher.
Sheila?
Kim, I don't see how we can accept this tonight or make a motion on this tonight.
Dr. Cochran and Sandy, I did let you, I messaged you what the issue is with this. I don't know if we need to go into a non-public to discuss, or if you could send us additional information.
And just for the record, we got this at 6:30 while we were in session.
I have no additional information.
Well, I'm going to ask that we table this until next week until we can get the full letter, because, you know,
I don't even have it.
I cannot make a decision on this.
That's fine, Sheila. I'll talk to Dr. Cochran about what the issue is here. We will be in a non-public session Tuesday, so we could probably, you know, at least give notice that,
well,
and then officially accept it next Thursday. So I don't think there's an issue with keeping it out till next Thursday. Okay. Let's see here. Any committee reports or reports of the school board? Anybody have anything? I know Jen's gone, and I'm going to actually ask Barbara just 1 second. I'm going to ask Lee or Mrs. Allaire. I know there were policy issues that needed to be addressed, partly due to the COVID. Do we have the policy committee up and running? And I also heard that there was an issue, some issues with curriculum. Are we doing what we need to, Mrs. Allaire, in terms of board committees to get everything all set?
So I can check with Kathy Belcher as well. She typically has the rosters of who was on those committees last year. I know there's been no new board members appointed. Sorry, I just enabled my video. I've been in touch with Mrs. Mockamer about the CNA committee, which we will co-chair together. So we've been in communication about that. We plan to start that up in early September. Policy, I was not involved in last year, but I can certainly touch base with Mrs. Belcher to see who will be co-chairing that with Mr. Doobie. But we're actively looking at ways to get those up and running. So.
We should be looking at revising our attendance policy to give more description around how to take attendance in non-face-to-face environments. So we'll be coming forward with that. And there's also some changes to at least one School Boards Association generic policy about pandemics. So we'll be looking at that policy as well.
Okay, great. You probably, I don't know how it worked in your previous district, and Sandy will know this. We just have to give proper notice on changing a policy. So there's a lag time there. So if we're looking to get something done, we've got it's usually a 2-meeting process. If that, actually 2 meetings of the board, but 1 meeting of the policy. So if there are things that need to be done in an emergency basis, we can do that, but we just have to notice it before the meeting. There's a policy on that. And Jen, who's not here, and Lee are our policy people on the board. So you can communicate with them as to what needs to be done so we can get it on the agenda if we need it to come forward as an emergency.
Great, we'll work on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, Barbara?
Yeah, so in regards to a decision we made at the last meeting for using Pollard School for elections, the Board of Selectmen in Plastow have made the new highway garage near Methuen Construction, and that big water tower is the new election venue, so we're not going to need Pollard. Just to let all the voters out in Plastow know that there is going to be a new place to vote on September 8th.
Thank you for letting them know.
Kim,
Okay, is there, Jeff?
Barbara, thank you for that update. I did speak with Barb Harb, and I think that the question of the November election may still be out there. No,
that they're going to use the highway garage.
Thumbs up. Excellent. Thank you.
Sheila?
Oh, Jeff, I knew what it was. I'm getting tired. Jeff, I do know that my Board of Selectmen did talk about
impact fees.
Yes, impact fees last meeting. So you should be hearing from Sandown relatively soon.
Already get notification from 2 towns. If I had ribbons, I'd hand them out to you guys. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Next
Don,
question is that
you can mail me mine, Jeff?
Sorry?
You can mail me mine.
Did you take a picture of the SAU?
How did you guess?
Well, we're, inquiring minds want to know. I'm like, he can't be in that building.
Is it because the time hadn't changed?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So a question back to impact fees. Is it the MS-25 that's due September 1?
It is, yep.
And so we will have that for the next board meeting?
That is my intention, yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, you'll have the DOE, it's the DOE 25 that you would need to review, and then the MS-25 is driven from that. But,
right. Okay, so that needs to go on the agenda for the next meeting for the 20th, at which we will hope to have in person at the PAC. Gary's still on the call. Gary, is the PAC finished, or will it be finished?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I did a final walkthrough with the builder today. I'm sorry, yesterday. They were wrapping up the front canopy, and that was the only issue that they had left. So they should be wrapped up today.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And the capacity of the PAC would be limited to 132 with the social distancing measures in place, so just be aware.
Is that the big room or the recital hall?
Recital hall is 32 alone, and the main auditorium with the recital hall seating is 132.
Thank you.
So what's the board's pleasure here? Do you want to go with the big hall, which requires more cleaning, or we could go with the recital hall and just say we're limited to X number of people?
Are we still going to be Zooming the meeting?
No, we would be live streaming the meeting.
What happens if we're in somebody's in quarantine?
You could call into the meeting.
Okay.
We have a conference phone.
I guess it's going to determine on how many employees we have coming in and possible DNIs. I mean, I opened the whole thing up to have them clean it.
Well, that's my issue.
Right.
I'm going to make a command decision. Let's use the recital hall because it's smaller, and if we have to, we'll just have to limit the number of public participants. Will Dr. Cochran just get an idea of you'll know how many staff need to be there? We know there are 9 board members plus the student plus the secretary, so that's a potential of 11. So.
Kim, it's, and you'll be able to take a look if you have a meeting there on the 18th. It's very, very important that the board members be able to socially distance as well. And
correct.
So I want to make sure that there's enough space on the recital hall floor to allow people to go through, to get up to the auditorium seating, and to allow all of you board members to be able to have the social distancing that you need. I think we should be okay, but we'll double check that. I know you're okay for your meeting on the 18th, no problem, but the public meeting on the 20th, I'd like to make sure that we have room for everyone, all board members. Kat, if you're going to be there, anyone who's going to be there, it would need to be on the floor, that we have room to do that. So.
Okay, well, let's leave it up to you then. We will be in the pack somewhere. We'll be in the pack somewhere.
Same address, yeah. Same address, same building.
Same address. Okay, great.
Hey, Kim, it's Gary. We'll do a mock-up tomorrow.
Okay,
with the tables and the social distancing in the recital hall, just to see if we can do it there. If not,
great, thank you. And you're also going to need to do a mock-up, and someone will be able to tell you what the mock-up needs to look like for Tuesday, because that will be a different mock-up.
Oh, well.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I think we're all set for Tuesday. I think we have the mock-up on that. Gary, I think it's more just a matter of the being able to fit everyone in. So we'll let you know, Kim.
Okay. Well, I'm just letting you know Jeff, it's a different mock-up on Tuesday. So, okay, great. Anything else? If not, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much. I will see the board members on Tuesday.
Good night, everybody.